Alright, so with the release of Hellraiser this week on Hulu, I thought it would be a perfect time to actually give my personal ranking of the entire Hellraiser franchise, since I've never done it before, and it is October, so it's the perfect time to pump out more horror-related content on the channel. Much like with any long-running horror franchise, there are some installments in the Hellraiser franchise that are definitely great, and there are also some that are pretty rough to get through. So make sure you share your rankings of the Hellraiser franchise down below in the comment section, because that is one of the most fun things about this, is having that discussion in the comments. So let's get right into my last place pick for the Hellraiser franchise. In last place, I have Hellraiser Revelations. I'm sure that is the consensus last place pick for a lot of Hellraiser fans, mostly because the film is pretty terrible across the board. The found footage genre has never been one of my particular favorites, and then you slap that into the Hellraiser franchise with horrendous acting from top to bottom, and honestly, this is probably the worst that Pinhead has ever looked when it comes to the makeup design. That isn't the fault of the actor portraying Pinhead in this, it's just the all-around feeling of the film is extremely cheap. You can tell that this was only made with about $300,000, which is an insanely low price. You can tell they didn't want to put a lot of money in this, since we know this was slapped together in a couple of weeks to just retain the rights to the Hellraiser franchise, and it shows with the sheer lack of effort on display. At number 10, I have Hellraiser Hellseeker. While this entry did bring us the return of Kirsty Cotton to the franchise, that kind of is where the positive start and end with this film, because, I mean, she's not even really in the movie all that much. This is one of the several Hellraiser films where the script initially didn't involve Hellraiser at all, and then they rewrote things to add Hellraiser elements into it, and out of that bunch, this is my least favorite. It's the most rough to watch for me, and it mainly boils down to the lead character that we follow throughout the film. I think he's just extremely unlikable. He has next to no redeeming qualities, and the sprinklings of Pinhead in this incorporated throughout really didn't salvage the film in any way. It's unfortunately one of the many Hellraiser sequels that just has a protagonist that I just don't like at all, so that kind of sours watching the film. At number 9, I have Hellraiser Deader. Cult storylines in particular aren't my favorite thing, especially when they are injected into long-running horror franchises, but in this installment, it could have been worse. I do feel the efforts in Deader are squandered by the end of the film, since there are interesting concepts here, having this reporter investigate these people killing people and then bringing them back from the dead, but it's another entry here where you inject Pinhead into the story, and it doesn't really go anywhere. Doug Bradley is always great in the role, but I don't feel like he was used properly here. I think with a little bit better integration into the main story, this could have been a little bit better of an entry in the franchise. At number 8, I have Hellraiser Inferno. This one is kind of fun to look back on because this was the directorial debut of Scott Derrickson, who we've known now from Sinister, Doctor Strange, and The Black Phone recently, and you do see the inklings here of what makes him a great director. You can tell he was trying to bring some level of visual flair here to Inferno with its horror elements. It's just the script is what really keeps this down. It's not Scott Derrickson's fault. He didn't write this. It was another one of those scripts that was turned into a Hellraiser film. It's written in such a way that makes everything extremely predictable. You can see the twist of the film with James Remar actually being Pinhead coming from 1,000 miles away. That's how easy it is to spot, along with the fact that yet another protagonist in the series is extremely unlikable, and I really have no idea why I would want to care about this guy's journey he goes on in the film. Also, watching so many of these films in a row, it gets kind of monotonous seeing so many of these revolving around a detective trying to solve a mystery. I mean, there's other films I have to talk about that involve that too, but it gets kind of old. At number 7, I have Hellraiser Hellworld. This one is kind of fun going back and rewatching since it is so dated with the technology and the early internet age. The Cenobites and the kids playing the game, it's super generic for that time period of the early 2000s horror. Whether it was intentional or not, I do kind of get a kick out of the cheesy goofiness out of this entry, and just the way that they incorporate Pinhead and the other Cenobites into the surreal stuff going on inside of this house that's centered around Lance Henriksen's character. It's definitely not a good movie by any means. It's certainly dated, like I mentioned, but there's that fun novelty here of Lance Henriksen in this, and an extremely young Henry Cavill before the Superman fame. Also, it feels kind of weird thinking that this came out only a couple months after the previous Hellraiser film in 2005. While Deader was shot a couple years prior, both of them were released in 2005, about 3 months apart from one another, which is interesting to think about because we're seeing that once again this year with Pearl and X both coming out in 2022. I mean, mean, both of those films are much better than these two Hellraiser films, but it's kind of cool to just see that that's happened before in the past. At number 6, I have Hellraiser Judgment. While it is still mixed results here, I do have to commend this entry for at least trying to bring something different and interesting to the franchise, besides the detective stuff, but we'll get there. Gary J. Tunnicliffe has been around with the franchise for such a long time, since the 3rd entry, so it was cool seeing him play this new character, the Auditor. He was probably one of the best additions to the franchise in a very long time. I found it to be extremely intriguing how he deals out punishment to others. It is extremely disgusting, though. That is one thing I do have to comment on. This film is completely gross. Even the different actor playing Pinhead in this, Paul T. Taylor, I think he was a massive improvement from the previous iteration in Revelations. Feeling much more like the classic ominous Pinhead with his mannerisms and ominously lurking about. I do think, though, unfortunately, the Cenobites themselves do feel a bit out of place with this mystery going on, this detective stuff that drives me crazy about this franchise, that we keep having detectives. Pretty standard entry in the horror franchise. It has some okay scares along with some really disgusting stuff in it. Also, the fact that Heather Langenkamp is in this for about like 4 seconds and you blink and you miss her, and we never see her again. That's kind of a bummer here because Heather Langenkamp is a horror icon. At number 5, I have Hellraiser Bloodline, the infamous Hellraiser in space. I mean, only one of the 3 storylines are in space, but usually that is what is remembered about this entry. Bloodline definitely has some stuff going for it. I think as a concept, seeing 3 generations of a family attempting to deal with the Cenobites is interesting. It brings some pretty cool ideas to the table in the way that we blend that story along with some pretty nasty, gory visuals whenever Pinhead and the Cenobites are on screen. I wish that I enjoyed every single one of the 3 generations. I think it would have been a great idea to have all of this set in the past with Angelique and Adam Scott's character. When we get into the space stuff and the more modern day elements, it does kind of bog down the film for me. As a film, it's just a bit rough around the edges. It needed a little bit more polishing, which is unfortunate because this is a film that was directed by Kevin Yeager, although we are using the Alan Smithy title for this film. And Kevin Yeager, he's a horror icon in his own right, working on many of the predominant horror franchises of the 80s and 90s. In retrospect, it's kind of a shame that Angelique didn't get to continue on with Pinhead and the rest of the Cenobites, because some of the other Cenobites in this were pretty cool. I mean, Angelique did have her fun moments with Adam Scott, who I always wondered ever since I watched this film originally how he was able to stay alive because he was supposed to be human, but I guess we're never going to get that answer or where Angelique is, I assume. At number 4, I have Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth. This entry is interesting because it is kind of more of a slasher film, which is kind of a departure compared to the first 2 films, at least in the traditional sense, and the fact that Pinhead is doing a ton more killing in this one, but it has enough style and flair to it that makes this such a fun watch if you just watch this out of sync with the rest of the franchise, because besides the original 2 films, I think this does have some of the greatest Pinhead moments in the entire franchise. The kills alone, the kills in this are the highlight here. I think they're pretty great. All around complete cheesy, gory fun. Very standard horror film. Pinhead kind of rides the line here between cheesy and serious in this one, and the other Cenobites besides Pinhead in this are a bit weak. I've always laughed really hard at the Cenobite that throws CDs just because what a concept. In hindsight, I almost wish that we had stopped with Hellraiser 3 just because I think this was the last Hellraiser film for a very long time that actually was really good. But at the same time, Doug Bradley was so iconic as the role of Pinhead, especially in this entry, that I could see why they'd want to continue making them because they were still successful. At number 3, I have the new Hellraiser that's coming to Hulu this week. I don't want to touch upon too many details in this because I did just post an entire review, so if you want to know my full thoughts about the film, make sure you go and check that out. But this is a great new version of Hellraiser. This new version is dripping in dark, creepy atmosphere and excels at making Pinhead and the rest of the Cenobites a big, ominous threat on the horizon with the tense story that it tells as we anticipate their arrival. The story is fresh, unique, and well crafted, and Jamie Clayton does a phenomenal job stepping into the role of Pinhead, so I hope that David Bruckner and Jamie Clayton continue to do more Hellraiser films, because honestly, even though I have it at number 3, I can see a lot of people putting this at least at number 2 or maybe even number 1 over the original Hellraiser. It's that good. At number 2, I have Hellbound Hellraiser 2. For me, this is such a great follow-up to the original film, doing pretty much everything a great sequel should do, elevating many of the elements that people enjoyed from the original Hellraiser, and that is giving the Cenobites a bit more of an expanded role in the story, bringing bringing back Kirsty and Julia, while also delving a bit deeper into the lore of the franchise. I will admit, it does go in a bit of a weird direction in many different ways. One of the big ones involving the Doctor and the Leviathan, all of that stuff was a bit odd, even for me, but I'm glad that the film does embrace that weirdness, keeping things uniquely Hellraiser. Between this and the original, I think it is a great continuation of that original film, and it's a great double feature if you're going to watch this and the original back to back. And at number 1, I have Hellraiser. I'll always adore Clive Barker's original Hellraiser. I think it just overall is a fantastic film. We can disregard so many of the terrible entries in the franchise, the bad sequels, because the original film is top tier. It's just in the way that the story perfectly blends together horror in this unique way of telling a love story with pain, torture, and pleasure. It's only bolstered more by great character work from Ashley Lawrence and Claire Higgins. Even rewatching it all these years later, everything holds up in it. The makeup effects are so gruesome and realistic looking. It's amazing, actually, that they still look as good as they do, and same goes for all the different Cenobites. They aren't as prominent in the original film, but boy do they make their mark every time they are on screen. Julia and Frank do provide some of the great scary moments, but Pinhead, the Chatterer, and the rest of the Cenobites, they are bone-chilling and creepy every time we get them on the screen. Doug Bradley in particular is the most frightening. I mean, that's why he is legendary status at this point. But even looking at it just as a singular film, it is a great story, a great classic horror film. But there you have it. That is my ranking of all the Hellraiser films to date, including the new, most recent Hellraiser film that's on Hulu. It's going to be a lot of fun talking some Hellraiser with you guys in the comment section down below. I feel like there's going to be some variations. I'm really curious to hear what your guys' lists are in the comment section, so make sure you share them down below. How would you rank the entire Hellraiser franchise? Because part of the fun of this is having that conversation with you guys in the comment section down below. Thank you guys always checking out the rankings. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you leave a like on the video, and also subscribe to the channel so you update reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. The next time, I'll see you guys later.